If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back. We have General McGill here with us. McGill Alexander, paratrooper general. He's back from the Bisley. He's been away for a while. So that will be the first question, sir. How was the Bisley? And then we will move over to what happened after Alexandra.
Good. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chris. The Bisley went very well, particularly considering the amount of rain that we've had. Fortunately, we had heavy rain in the beginning and heavy rain at the end, but most of the Bisley was fairly dry and we had very good conditions. We didn't have very many foreigners this year, but I think that's because next year and the year after we have World Championships taking place in South Africa. And I think people are saving their money for that to come out and attend the actual World Championships. But the Bisley was successful. We had a good number of South African shotists there, and the standard was again very high. And I think the South Africans are very much looking forward to the World Championships, and I think they're ready for them. So let's hope they do well next year. I'm certainly looking forward to it. And of course, the reason why I'm late in this recording is not just because of the Bisley, but at the end of the Bisley, I spent a couple of days with one of my old soldiers in a little town called Polru in the Free State. In fact, he was the soldier who was in I think it was in episode 4 where I was discussing my time as a company commander at 1 Parachute Battalion, and this is the man Pochi Potchefstroom, who was my first casualty that I experienced. And we've remained in touch over the years, and he very kindly invited me to spend a few days with him, which I really enjoyed. And it was good to see him again. It's wonderful to know that you can still be in touch with men you commanded 40 years and more ago, and that they really want you to be there. So you know, I felt very privileged to do that. And then I spent a few days with my daughter and my grandchildren in Vicksburg. So I got back after dark last night, and it's been a good 2 weeks away, but I'm glad to be back on Legacy Conversations. Of course, yes, I'm planning to discuss next. I mean, we're finished now with Alexandra and the time I spent at Group 18, and the experiences that I had there. There was much more that happened than what I spoke about, but of course it's impossible to fit everything in, and it's also pretty much impossible to remember everything that happened. So I tend to keep records of most things, and so I do have a good record of most of my career, but there are times when you're just too busy to do that, and some things go by the wayside. So I was appointed as the Chief Instructor Staff Duties at the Staff Duties branch of the SA Army College, the CISD or CIST. In Afrikaans, it was the Hoofinstructeur Stafdienste, or the HIST. And the HIST was quite an influential position, a lot of status attached to it. And I was surprised and pleased to get the appointment. It's a particularly important appointment because the Chief Instructor Staff Duties is a sort of, in the military context, he's a sort of Dean of Studies, as you would have in a university. He oversees what takes place in that faculty, if you want to call it that. So my job was overseeing the directing staff, the DS as we call them, overseeing the DS in the equipping of selected officers of the South African Army with the knowledge, the skills, and the disposition that are required for appointment in command and staff positions on the operational level of war. it was decided that a few years before I got back to the Army College, that the junior staff course would be on the tactical level, and the senior command and staff course would be on the operational level of war. So that is what we were then looking at. And it amongst many of the tasks that we had to carry out there, it was included, and in all of this, it wasn't my job, it was the job of all the directing staff, all the DS. So I was only overseeing and coordinating what the DS were doing. And they were working very closely with the students on the course. And of course, I worked with the students as well, but perhaps not quite as closely as the DS did. And we had to assess, according to 12 behavioral dimensions, the leadership and the managerial skills of the students who were attending the staff course. The staff course had changed quite a bit since I'd been a DS myself, about, I think it was about 7 years before that. But a lot of the essential military stuff still remained the same. For me, when I moved to the college, I have to admit that initially I saw it as a further shrinking of my horizon. You know, when I'd been officer commanding the Parachute Brigade, the whole of Southern Africa was my playground. I seemed to move around all over the place, holding exercises, doing operations, and so on. And then I was suddenly constricted to the Johannesburg area as a group commander, whereas I'd seen my commander, the Chief of the Army, while I was the Parachute Brigade commander. I saw him maybe twice a year. At the group, I saw my commander at least once a month, and probably more than that. But when I got to the Army College, I found that my commander at the Army College, I was a colonel, he was a brigadier. I saw him every day. Not that he was looking into my work every day, but, you know, I was with my commander every day. And if he wanted to ask me questions, or if he wanted to sit in at any of the classes and check on what was going, he could do so. So initially, my feeling was that I was being really constricted now. I was really being limited by being placed where I was. But I was very aware of the importance of the job and of the influence that one had over the students. Because the students at that stage were all lieutenant colonels, or commandants as they were when I arrived there. And all my DS were also commandants. Many of them had only just completed the staff course a year or two before that. I was very privileged, I think, in the sense that I had commanded a brigade and I had commanded a group. So on that level, I had a lot of experience, which none of my DS had, and certainly none of the students had. So it was privileged for me to be in that sort of position. But I did find that when you're working with commandants, with lieutenant colonels, it's actually a very difficult group of people to work with. Because when you've been in the military for as long as that they had been, probably 12, 15 years, you want to be commanding. You really, you reach the point. If you're a general duties officer, if you're a combat arms officer, at that level, you want to be commanding. You don't want to be sitting on course, and you certainly don't want to be a staff officer. Look, there are some people who want to be staff officers. That's all they want to be. They don't want to be commanders. But most guys in the infantry or the artillery or the armor engineers, they really want to be commanding at battalion level now. And it's a bit of a frustration for them that they're not. And they also feel that they know enough to be doing that. And so they don't want you to be telling them what to do. They want to be telling other people what to do. So it's a difficult level at which to work with people, and particularly to try and impart knowledge, skill, and most importantly, disposition in those people. But that's what we had to do. In my personal life, there were also some major issues taking place. The first of which was my eldest daughter, Melanie, had now finished her matric. She was in matric the year that I was working in Alex. And she'd indicated that she wanted to go to university and she wanted to study social work. And I said to her, you know, you can make the applications and you look at the universities that you might want to go to. And so she said, well, she'd really like to go to Stellenbosch because that's the university I graduated from. So, you know, she wanted to carry on that tradition and be a Māori. But Stellenbosch is a long way off down in the Cape. And I didn't want to dissuade her. I said, well, you know, look around. There's Pretoria here where we're living. There's Wits in Johannesburg. And there's Potchefstroom not far away and so on. So, but look around. And she applied to several of the universities. But when she was accepted by Stellenbosch, she said that's where she really wants to go. Fortunately, we were able to work out a very workable situation because she had to go into a residence. And the workable situation that we had was that I think it was twice a week, there was a C-130 flight between Eysterplaat and Waterkloof. It would fly down from Waterkloof to Eysterplaat and then fly back again. And if there was space on it, then she could get a ride on that. And in actual fact, she managed to do that virtually every vacation that she came home. She didn't come home for all of them, but the ones that she came home for, she did manage to. Sometimes she'd have to wait a day or two because it was a scheduled flight and it only flew on certain days. And she'd have to wait a day or two before she could get a ride on it. But then she would come up, and the same with her return. She'd have to sometimes return a day or two before the classes started, sometimes even more than that. But there was this free ride that she was able to get, and that made a big difference. So I was actually happier with her at university in Stellenbosch, not just because it's my alma mater, but because she was in the residence. But the other thing was, if, you know, we lived a little distance from the center of Pretoria. We were in the south of Pretoria, but some distance away. And that meant that she would have had to have transport to go to classes in Pretoria. If she'd gone to Wits in Johannesburg, she would also have had to have transport. And, you know, that would have cost me because I couldn't have given her unreliable transport. And so in the end, I was more at ease with her in the residence in Stellenbosch. And as things turned out, she loved Stellenbosch. She had a wonderful time there. She was at the university for a total of 5 years. She got a bachelor's degree in social work, and then she went on to specialize at master's level in medical social work, so that she would do the social work in hospitals. And she loved it. She had a wonderful time at Stellenbosch. So that was something happening on the sideline, and I had to actually arrange with my new boss that I would be able to take her down to the university and, you know, get her settled in and so on, and have a few days off for that, which wasn't a problem. He was quite happy to help me. And my new boss, by the way, was Brigadier Anton van Graan, who had been one of my commanders at 1 Parachute Battalion. So we knew each other very well. And when I was posted there and I walked into the office to report to him, the first thing he said to me was, I've appointed you as a chief range officer at the Bisley this year. So after a 10-year break, I was back into the Bisley. And then after that, except for the time that I was in Taiwan, I've been doing it without stop for, going on close to 30 years now. So, yeah. So that was a personal issue that I had to deal with. The staff course itself, because I'd had a 2-year staff course in Spain and been very much thrown into the whole concept of staff training, I was pleased to be there. I was pleased to be at the college. And the college is a very historical place. It's an impressive building. It's a very serene and tranquil atmosphere around the college, big grounds and lots of trees and lawns and so on. So it's a nice campus. And historically, the staff training in South Africa only began in about 1927. Prior to that, the first 14 years after the establishment of Union, we had a very, very tiny permanent force. And we just relied on British officers who were staff trained, who would be attached to the UDF, or there were a few UDF officers that were sent to the UK to do the course at Camberley. Not very many, but there were a few. Some of the very first one, I think, was Frank Tron, who was the General Officer Administration through most of the war in Cairo in the Second World War as a Major General. Another one was Len Bayers, who later became the Chief of the General Staff for a very short while after the Second World War, when the Nationalists took over the government. He had refused to sign the oath to serve outside of the Union during the war, so he'd remained in, and then he retired after the war. And the Nationalists called him back, and they said, "Well, you didn't sign the oath, so you be the guy who run the Defence Force for us. So we know we can rely on you." And he lasted, I don't think it was quite, might have been about a year. But what the Nationalists didn't understand was, although he had his personal preferences politically, he was a very professional officer. And when Minister Erasmus started interfering in the running of the Defence Force, doing what our current Minister of Police is doing in the police, getting involved in the operational level instead of sticking up on the policy level. When that started happening, Bayer said, "You don't do this. This is my domain. You don't interfere. I'm running this Defence Force. You making the policy." And the minister didn't like that, so Bayers resigned. And that was a bit of a shock to them. They didn't expect, an officer who happened to favour the Nationalists, but they didn't expect him to be so professional that he put his profession ahead of his politics. Anyway, he was one of I think he was the second or third South African to be trained at Camberley. So by the time the Second World War came about, we'd started running courses, not very successfully. They tended to be too short, and the officers, the permanent force officers, were not properly prepared for them. Our permanent force in those days, and the concept stuck in many people's minds that this is all that permanent force people do. The permanent force was just there to train the citizen force. The active citizen force, they were the regiments. And their officers got regimental experience. But the permanent force officers never got regimental experience. There weren't regiments, there weren't battalions that they could serve in, particularly after the disbandment of the South African Mounted Riflemen. So they battled a bit until they started sending some of these officers overseas to England to serve in British regiments. And that gave them a good grounding when they came back. And then they got more success in the staff courses that they were running. One of those that they sent abroad was Everett Poole, who was later the GOC of the 6th Armored Division in Italy. And the irony is that he was sent overseas and he spent 2 years in the British Brigade of Guards. And that's where he got his regimental experience. And some years later, as a major general, when he commanded the 6th South African Armored Division, one of the brigades that was attached to this armored division was the Guards Armored Brigade. So ultimately, he had the guards that he had served with under his command during the war, which was rather a nice twist, I think. And of course, we all know that Everett Poole ended up as probably one of the best field commanders, highly acclaimed and highly decorated by both the British and the Americans that he served under. And certainly the man who should have taken over as the Chief of the General Staff, but he was sidelined when the Nationalists came to power. So staff training had a long sort of historical background to it. During the war, we had to run quite a lot of staff courses, and they were concentrated staff courses. And we sent a lot of people on staff courses. For instance, there was a staff school at Haifa in what was then Palestine, what is now Israel, and it was run by the British, and many of our officers were trained on that staff course over there. Some even attended Camberley during the war. So at the end of the war, we had quite a few well-trained staff officers. Not all of them stayed in the military, particularly after the Nationalists took over power. But again, after the war, the permanent force shrunk, and there wasn't a great need for staff officers. We didn't have full-time brigades and divisions and things like that. So, but by the early 1960s, they began to realize that, by then South Africa the Republic was now looming, and the isolation was on the horizon, and there were threats appearing on the borders, and it was obvious that the Defence Force was going to grow. So an effort was made to build the staff courses and to start running a full staff course every year. Initially, they were fairly small, 8, 10, maybe 15 students, but they grew as time went along. And they were run very much on the model of the old Second World War staff course. Until Constant Viljoen became the officer commanding the Army College. And he then introduced a revolutionary change in staff training in the early 70s. We moved from a more attritional defensive type of warfare to a more mobile approach. And he really revolutionized the staff training at the Army College. I think nobody fully appreciates just what an impact Constant Viljoen had on the military as a whole, and what a visionary he was, and how far ahead he actually looked in every post that he occupied. So by the time I became a DS at the Army College in 1985, the staff course was far more functional and far more geared for the type of war that we were finding ourselves in. And by the time I became the chief the chief instructor at staff duties, it was even more finely tuned and homed in on the type of warfare that we were involved in. When I arrived there, the way it was presented had changed. It had grown to a course of 12 months, a full year of training. When they had the differentiated training between blue and red, the blue staff course only lasted 6 months. At the end you all went through the same course, but at the end of 6 months, they would identify people that they felt were not going to become commanders. They were only going to become staff officers, and they would end the course after 6 months. The others would carry on for another 6 months, and they were the ones that were scheduled to be commanders. But as I explained in an earlier episode, that never really worked. It wasn't, because some people who only had 6 months staff training behind them became commanders, and the others who had red staff qualifications, some of them never qualified or were never appointed as commanders. So they went back to a single staff course. But what they did do is they started finding there was a backlog of officers, because, the Defence Force had grown massively as the war had increased, and the permanent force had grown. And there were more and more regular battalions and national service battalions. So there were lieutenant colonels, commandants needed to command these battalions. And there was the homeland, like Transkei and Ciskei and Bophuthatswana and Venda and so on, they had their own militaries, but those militaries had to be not just trained by the South Africans, but initially they had to be staffed by South Africans until they got onto their own footing. And of course, there was the Southwest Africa Territory Force, and that had to be mainly staffed by South Africans, because there just weren't enough trained people in those areas. So initially, they were mainly South Africans. So the permanent force grew significantly. And with that growth, there was a demand for more people to be staff trained, and there was a backlog. We couldn't accommodate, because there were limited facilities at the Army College, and you would work on between 30 and 40 people on a staff course. But when you get to 40, it would be pushing it a bit, because the classrooms couldn't accommodate more. There were limitations on the accommodation that was at the college. Traditionally, the staff college students, the staff course students, stayed in little rondavels that were built on, each one had his own rondavel. And there weren't enough of those to accommodate everybody. So you couldn't make the courses too big. So what they did was they introduced a 12 months of distance education, which was worked out in conjunction with UNISA, getting inputs from UNISA, which was the largest distance education university in the world at that stage. And they gave inputs and helped to get the whole structure going. And it was a good system that was introduced. But anyone who was in line to be staff trained would do 12 months of distance education and write certain exams during that time, submit certain tasks, and he'd be visited by the residential or by the DS that were allocated to the distance education section of the branch, of the staff duties branch, because it was now divided into two: a distance education and a residential education section. And you did a 12-month phase of distance education and then a 6-month residential phase to consolidate that. And then that way you were able to get through 2 staff courses a year, because it's only 6 months that you got the people there. So, and I arrived when this was in progress. But I also arrived at the time that they were finding that it was not working. And the reason why it was not working was not the distance education. The problem was that you needed more residential time, because there were certain things that had to be sacrificed. And one of the things that had to be sacrificed was the joint exercise with the Army, Air Force, and Navy together. That had to now be sacrificed, because that was only held once a year. And now we got 2 courses a year, and the Navy and the Air Force didn't change their courses. So it wasn't working out anymore. So it was a problem, and there just wasn't time to fit that in as well. So while I was there, my first year there this was still in place. But in the second year, we returned to the 12-month course, which was infinitely better. There's no doubt about it. But initially, we maintained the distance education. So you now did 12 months of distance education, and then you did 12 months of of residential. And that was found to be very good. Unfortunately, when integration took place, it was found that the guys that were being integrated from other forces couldn't handle the distance education. And so that was eventually dropped, and we returned to a 12-month residential course that was presented. So that was what was happening with the staff training at the time, which brought its own challenges while we were working. I had two commanders of the Army College while I was there. Anton van Graan was there when I arrived. I think he was only there for a year. He'd been there for longer, but I only served under him for a year, and then he left. And then Koos Loubser took over as the commander. Now, I'd known Koos Loubser for quite a long time. He was an artilleryman. In fact, his nickname was Koos Bom. And he was a very interesting man. I knew him because on one occasion, Arms Corps wanted to try and sell artillery pieces that they had got, guns that they had got as an interim measure from Israel to use. But we now wanted to get rid of them. So Arms Corps wanted to sell them, and they tried to sell them to Chile. I don't know whether they ever did or not. But they went across, and there was a big presentation. Koos Bom was going to try and help them sell these guns to the Chileans, and did presentations on what they could do with the guns. I think they were known as the G4. But they were an Israeli gun, and they were okay as an interim for training and so on, but they didn't really suit our needs. They were too heavy, and they had all sorts of other limitations. And so Koos Bom had to go over to Chile to try and help sell these. And I was appointed as the interpreter to go along. So I got to know him quite well because we spent those few weeks in Chile together working on this project. And then lo and behold, when I became a group commander at Group 18, he was at one of the other groups. I forget the number now, 43, I think it was. But he was the group commander on the East Strand. So his group sort of bordered with mine. So now I sat in conferences with Koos Bom and, with the general in front of us and so on. And we went on team building outings and so on. So again, we got to know each other quite well. But he was quite a lot senior to me, so he was due for promotion, and he was promoted, and he was sent to the Army College. And when I'd been there a year, there Koos Bom arrived as the OC. And Koos Bom was I'm not sure how you describe them. He was a stirrer. He was a disruptor. He was a bit of a maverick. He liked doing things differently. And he reveled in confusing the students. He would come in and he would say, you can't do it like this. But he was really prompting them to try and stand up and say to him, but you've got to do it like this. And I found that quite difficult sometimes, because I placed a lot of emphasis on the appreciation process. I'd found in my time as a brigade commander and as a group commander that the appreciation process was a very good process for determining a plan and for putting something down that would be viable and functional. But it all depended on the command appreciation. And in the more American NATO-orientated parts of the world, which included Spain and which I'd been subjected to, they have what they call the commander's intent. And the commander's intent has to be known to the subordinates. Now, our process of appreciation and of the command appreciation is the way in which the commander actually determined what his intent was. And then he had to formulate, as part of his appreciation, certain guidelines to issue to his subordinates. And they would then work on those guidelines, and he would give them the parameters which they would work. And then they would produce certain options and later courses of action, which would be presented to him, and then he would make decisions based on that. So they would, bearing in mind what his overall intent is, and what the guidelines he'd given them as in his command appreciation, they would be able to formulate plans, the detail of the plans, which they could present to him, and then he could say, okay, we'll accept that, or we'll accept that, or we'll combine these two, or whatever the case might be. And I found that a very workable way of going about things. It was a very structured and a very definite way of going over. You weren't just dancing around and grabbing at little bits and pieces and coming up with a light goes on your brain and you say, this is what we'll do, and you haven't worked out any of the implications of that. And that's what I tried to impress on the students. So I would always, the lecture on the command appreciation, I would always take that myself, and I would present that myself. But I would find it a little difficult sometimes when I'd done that, and then Koos Bom would come and sit and listen to my lecture. And then when I'm finished, then he would get up and say to the students, you don't need to appreciate anything. You've just got to know what you're doing. And, I would be thunderstruck when he'd do this. But now he's waiting to get a reaction from the students. And often the students didn't realize that. And then they'd be totally confused. Now, who do we believe? The OC or the chief instructor? What? Of course, a lot of the guys said, no, the OC is right, because they don't want to go through the hard work of an appreciation. So, Koos and I had a few bumps with that, but fortunately I did know him quite well, and we were able to discuss these things. We had some hard words on occasion, but he was the boss. So, but I enjoyed him. He was a good man to work for, and I must say, when I had a few problems here and there, he covered me in a way which it taught me lessons too about how a commander must handle his subordinates and protect his subordinates from things that happen outside. So that was part of my problem. I had the difficult lieutenant colonels to handle on the one side, and a difficult commanding officer to handle on the other side. But it was a time of extreme growth for me in doing this. It taught me a great deal. What I do need to say is that I had the dubious privilege, if one could call it that, of being the chief instructor at the time of the 1994 election. That the impact of that election on the students, on the college as well, but the college was an institution, and institutions have to change with the times. But the impact on the students was quite significant. The students they were selected. They were the best lieutenant colonels in the army, in their group, in their year group. So these weren't stupid people. They were bright. They knew what was going on. They were aware of the situation in the country. And they approached the changes with a sense of reality. They knew and they accepted that there would be huge changes, and they were going to bear the brunt of these changes. They knew that. But there was also a sense of loss that you could pick up amongst them. They knew that a lot of the opportunities that they'd been working for 12 and 15 years are now going to be denied them. They knew that. They could see it was coming. And I remember the one course. There was one of the students, Sydney Zeeman, who was a good guitar player and singer. And he composed a song that the students used to sing. And it was they'd often at functions and at a braai place or something, they would all get together and they'd sing while Sydney played his guitar. And I used to listen to that, and it was it was a really sad song. You could sense the feeling of loss, that their world was about to collapse, and they knew it. And they also knew that they couldn't change that. That was going to happen. So there was a reality there, but there was also a sadness in the song. I've got the words of the song somewhere because I asked Sydney for them. They were really, it was really a nice mournful tune. I forget the tune now, but it was a well-known tune, a well-known song. So, it had a real mournful aspect to it. At the time, we had quite a few of the students from the homelands that would come and do their staff course, because, of course, the Transkei, BOP, and Ciskei, and so on, they didn't have a staff college of their own. So when their officers reached a certain level, they would come to us. And I remember there was a guy, a lieutenant colonel from BOP. He was a white lieutenant colonel. BOP had quite a lot of white officers in their army. They weren't seconded SADF people who were just there for a while. They were actually BOP Defence Force people, and they had quite a few white officers and NCOs in their army. Unlike the Ciskei and the Transkei, they were all black. Up to a point, they had seconded South Africans, and then when the seconded South Africans withdrew, they were completely black, and so if we had officers from those places, they were always black. If we had officers from Botswana, they could be black, they could be white, and this particular fellow was a white officer. I think he'd maybe done national service in the SADF, but for the rest, he'd been in the BOP Defence Force all the time. And you'll remember that BOP was not very enthusiastic about integrating, and there was quite a lot of issues around BOP. And this guy was extremely concerned. He was concerned about his family back in Mabatu, and he was concerned about his future in the military and what was going to happen to him, and the future of BOP and so on. And he started drinking. And he ended up coming to class, and he was smelling of booze, and he was still under the influence of booze. So I had to call him in and dress him down and say, listen, that doesn't happen again. If it happens once, just once, you're out of here, and you won't get your qualification. And he was in tears, and he told me all his concerns and so on. And I had to say to him, look, I understand your concerns, but right now you're here to do this course. Now put those things aside and do your work and finish your course. And then you'll have the opportunity to go and try and sort out what you have to sort out. But you're not going to solve anything by getting drunk every night. So it was a time of tension too. There were a lot of things happening that made it very, very difficult. And then the elections came, and there was a lot of concern about the elections. People were very concerned. Things were on a knife edge at the time of the elections. And I don't think people fully understand the role that the old SADF played in maintaining stability, preventing a virtual civil war breaking out. They played a very, very important role. And this was largely due to the leadership of George Meyrung at the top. He played a vital role in that. With the whole BOP business, with a number of other things that took place, Meyrung was very decisive and very clear on what sort of stand to take, and made it clear to the Defence Force where we stood and where we must stand at this stage, which made it a lot easier. But of course, there were people who were very opposed to the way he wanted to do it. And there were two interesting things about it. The one was that now the Defence Force has been put on the alert and called up extra citizen force guys and deploying people all over the place, because the war, of course, was over. But now we've got to make sure that the country doesn't subside into another war. So a decision was made to suspend the staff course. And that had been done in the past. When there'd been a big crisis in the past, or a huge operation was taking place into Angola, the staff course would be suspended, and the students would all be sent up there and would be deployed in positions as staff officers, or some occasionally even in a command position for that particular operation or that crisis that was coming up. So it wasn't unusual for something like this to happen. And now again, it was suspended. And all the students were farmed out to headquarters around the country, usually in the area that they came from. And that's where they were. So they would be at home in the evening, but for most of the day, and often for the night as well, they would be working in the headquarters that they'd been assigned to, command headquarters, group headquarters, whatever the case might be. Which was very nice for those units, because they now would have a person that they could, who's at a significant level that they could utilize. But also at that time, a force was established called the National Peacekeeping Force. They wore a blue uniform, and it was a hodgepodge of SADF, MK, UPLA, all sorts of, and some of the TDF and Sky Defence Force and Vendor Defence Force. They had them all together, and in fact, they had a major general from the Vendor who was in charge of the National Peacekeeping Force, the NPKF. And they were deployed when some of the townships where the violence was at its worst, with the ANC IFP rivalry that was going on, and a few other lesser issues that they were deployed for. The NPKF in the end was a bit of a disaster. It was of brigade strength. I think there were 3 battalions and then a brigade headquarters. But it was all mixed with all these elements, and there'd been no preparation like there was when the integration took place after the elections. Here, the people had all just been put together and given a bit of training, and now they had to go and deploy together. And it was a recipe for disaster. It was not going to work. So they were now supposedly trying to keep the peace during the elections. But, in his wisdom, George Meyrung decided that, they must go ahead and do what they have to. But he's calling up more and more reserves from the Defence Force, citizen force people, and deploying them. And the army was tasked to do this. So I thought to myself, well, this is nice. I'll have a few weeks without any students. I'll be able to sit down and catch up on some other work, and I'd had everything sorted out so that I could work within my study. And lo and behold, I get a phone call. I've got to go down to the Director of Operations, Brigadier Chris Sarfontein, in Blenny at Army Headquarters. He wants to see me. So I went down there, and he says, the NPKF ops room is a disaster. I want you to go up there and sort it out for the next few weeks. So that was the end of my little holiday that I thought I was going to have. So I found myself in the NPKF ops room, and it was chaos. The people there, I think there were about maybe 10 people altogether in this ops room. Several of them junior officers, but some lieutenant colonels, and there was a full colonel from TDF, I can't remember, Sky Defence Force, who had done a staff course in Nigeria. And every time he had to do something, he would take a little aid memoir out that he got from Nigeria and have to check and see whether it was in the aid memoir, and that would help him to do. There were no ops logs. There were no returns. There was no information in the ops room. There was just nothing happening. They had a few maps and so on, but they had no idea what was going on. They weren't getting returns from where they were supposed to. There were no sit-reps. There was no filing system. So it was actually a very busy time for me trying to sort that lot out for them. And the general who was in charge was never there. You never saw him. He had a private plane that belonged to the Vendor Defence Force, and it was sitting at Waterkloof. And on a Thursday afternoon, he would go up to Waterkloof and get into the plane and fly up to Thohoyandou. And then on Monday afternoon, he would come back. So from Monday afternoon until Thursday afternoon, there was a time that he was at work. And he had lots of long weekends. And while he was at work, he never came into the ops room. We never saw him. I tried to get hold of him. I did go and speak to him once or twice. He was quite honestly totally disinterested. And he never integrated. I don't know what happened to him. He just disappeared from the scene. So that was a bit of an eye-opener, that experience with NPKF. Then when the colonels all came back, or when the commandants all came back, they discovered that they're now all lieutenant colonels. The decision had been made to do away with the rank of commandant, and they were all lieutenant colonels. And I mean, that's a superficial aspect, but I must say it took a while to get into the habit of calling these guys colonel now and not calling them commandant anymore. So it was a bit of a cultural change. That we found that after the election, now the whole process of integration was going to take place. Mandela had been inaugurated, and now officially the SANDF no longer existed. It was now the SANDF, and we had to integrate into the SANDF. But the integration was a bit of a farce in terms of the terminology, because they kept saying, this is no longer the SADF, it's now the SANDF, and the SADF's got to integrate the same as MK's got to integrate, and OPLA's got to integrate, and integrate, and the TDF and all the others have got to integrate. But the fact of the matter is that the infrastructure, the vehicles, the systems, everything was SADF. Everything was the SADF. It wasn't something that was just put down and now you pull everybody into it. And the only other organizations that had infrastructure and systems were the TDF and the BOP and the CISCI and the vendor, and all those systems had been put in place by the SADF. So it was really more of an absorption of all the other elements into the old SADF. But of course, that changed radically over the next 5 to 10 years. It became a completely new organization. But initially it wasn't. It was the SADF that was busy tumbling over itself to try and accommodate all these other things that were being pulled in. And it was the SADF that had to take the initiative with things. And it was the SADF that had to keep things running and keep things moving and make things tick all the time. And the SADF was always the bad guy. We were always blamed for everything else. Anything that went wrong, it was always the fault of the SADF. I had to give briefings on the staff course to visiting groups from MK and various other organizations that were integrating, tell them what staff training is, how it works, how we go about it, what the curriculum entails, how we did things, what the dimensions are that we evaluate the people on, and so on. They all seemed quite impressed, a bit skeptical about some things, but I don't know how much they knew. Judging from the questions that they asked, they didn't know much. They were really lost by all of this. But I was positive, and the people I worked for were positive. We all thought we'll make this thing work. We can make it work. There were transformation work groups that were established to help with the integration and help with the transformation and everything else that must take place. And I was appointed as co-chair of one of the subcommittees for integration. how we were going to do integration at the Army College. That was interesting, and it was quite demanding. The other co-chair was an MK man. And it was particularly interesting because I began to find out very rapidly that these guys didn't really have much actual military knowledge. They were politically very indoctrinated, very aware and very astute on the political level. And if anything political was discussed, they were in that conversation, boots and all. But if it was a purely military issue that was being discussed, they wouldn't get involved because it was clear they didn't know enough to get involved with that sort of thing. So I could see that there was a dark cloud looming up ahead. These people were going to focus on the political side in order to get the positions and the advancement that they want. And the military side was going to fade into the background. And that's precisely what happened. I also found that we had the, I forget what they were called, BMAT, British Military Assistance Team. They were involved because with the integration, they were part of the committees that decided on these guys coming in from MK and so on, whether they were going to be a staff sergeant or a lieutenant or whatever. They would assess the background that they had, and from that they would make an appointment. Now, you know, with all due respect to the British guys, and I met some of them, and they were really, really nice guys and very professional officers and so on, but they were naive. They didn't understand the way these things, either that or they didn't really care. They were quite prepared to let these guys pull the wool over their eyes and get away with it. I subsequently spoke to an MK officer that I got to know quite well a good few years after that, maybe 10 years after that. And I spoke to him about this, and he laughed. He said, yeah, he said, many of the guys who were integrated had never been in MK. He said, we would go into the townships and we would recruit people. And we would give them a CV and we would say, this is what you go to appear before. You are now going to be included as a member of MK, and you're going to be absorbed into one of these integration units or setups that they've got. And from that, when you appear before the board, you've got to know this out of your head. This is where you were trained in Tanzania, and you did the following courses and so on. And that's what they did. They weren't tested on those courses that they claimed to have done. They weren't. They would say, this is what we've done. And then the BMAT guys would sit there with the others. And the SADF guys who were on this board would complain. They'd be overridden by the MK guys and the BMAT and all the rest. And so you'd get guys who were appointed to staff sergeants or captains and so on, who they had not a clue. They wouldn't be able to strip a rifle, certainly not assemble it. They wouldn't know how to carry out a section attack, never mind a company attack. But you know, they appointed as captains and majors. So they were, and he said we had to do it. We didn't have enough people. It's the only way. We had told them we have so many people. Now they wanted to see where are those people. So we had to produce numbers, and that's what we had to do. And that's how we got them in. I said to them, well, look what we're sitting with now. He said, yeah, it's a problem now, but it's the only way we could do it. So it was a time of frustration. And it was, but it was interesting. It was an interesting experience, and I learned a lot. But at the same time, I wasn't really surprised. I wasn't surprised by what was happening. I more or less knew those sort of things that were going to happen. Maybe not the detail, But in principle, I knew this was the way they were going to go. There was a lot of uncertainty around the future form of tactical and operational training, which of course impacted on us at the Staff College, at the Army College, because everybody was saying, now we no longer have an enemy. There's not going to be any conflict for the next 1,000 years. We don't need to train people for war. So what do we train them for? This was the quandary that we sat with. When you issue orders, you have a little keyword in your mind. SMEEK, situation, mission, execution, admin and log, command and signal. You go through those 5 things. And you guys came in and they said, no, we can't do this. You can't use a word like execution. That's too bloodthirsty. It's we're onto human rights now. You can't use execution. Really? So what do you want us to use? No, you've got to find another word. You can't use execution. Everybody in the whole world uses execution. When they talk about carrying out an operation, you execute your operation. These guys couldn't understand that. No. That execution is bloodthirsty. That's that belongs to apartheid. That's not what we're going to do now. And I use that as an example of what we were faced with this sort of thing. It's at a very low level, but you can take it up to a higher level. I think ultimately sanity prevailed on that one, and they were eventually, I don't know, but I think at this stage they talk about execution again. I don't know, but when you use a word like execution, they see a guy with a hood over his head and an axe on his shoulder and a block in front of him. He's waiting for you to put your head down on the block. Anyway, while I was at the Army College, I undertook quite a lot of research on my own that I did concurrently with the work that we were doing at the Army College. I did some research at the archives into the records of staff-trained officers in the UDF and the SADF, because what I found was there was a tradition at the Army College of, at the end of every staff course, a plaque would be made with the names engraved on the metal of each person who qualified in that staff course. And the staff course's number would be put on top and the year and so on. And it would be hung in the quadrangle of the Army College. And so they had and I looked at these and I thought to myself, but these things are not correct. This one says he's the 15th staff course. But there have been far more than 15 staff courses. So I thought, there's something wrong with this. So I started doing research into how staff training came about, who was sent on staff courses. And I eventually drew up a fairly accurate register of every officer, South African Army officer, who had been staff trained from the first one in 1920 when Frank Tron went to Camberley, through to 1927 when the first staff course was held, the 4 or 5 other staff courses held before the Second World War, all the staff courses held during the Second World War, and there were a lot of courses because they had to train the ACF guys on staff courses too, so they had very abbreviated staff courses. They were still staff courses, and these guys were given a staff qualification, so those all had to be included. And then after the Second World War, and then I also researched as far as I could which South African officers were trained in other countries. Some were trained in America, some were sent to France, some like myself were sent to Spain. How many had been trained in other countries that had their staff training there? And so I covered the era from 1927, when our first staff course was held, until 1996, with, as far as possible, the lists of all the people who qualified in every course. Some courses I couldn't get all the lists, and some courses I couldn't get any lists for, but the course took place. I could at least record that there was a course. And that was quite a good piece of research that I did. And as part of that, I also wrote a synopsis of the history of staff training in the Army. And I submitted this to Koos Bom. He was very impressed, and he said he's going to take it further. And I didn't hear anything more. But when I was in Taiwan, I heard something more. But I'll get onto that. That's one of the things. And then I continued doing research and writing into the airborne concept. There was a military essay competition that was popular at the time, the BARCOM Professional Military Writing Competition. Every year there would be a prize for that. And I'd entered it on several occasions. I think I won it once, and I was a sort of runner-up once or twice. But anyway, and this in 1994, I won the competition for a paper that I wrote called a Rapid Deployment Force for Peace Operations in Africa. And based it on because now we're members of the UN again, and we're able to participate in UN peacekeeping operations and so on. So I did a study of how the UN saw peace support operations and the spectrum of peace support operations, because there are very different, many different types of peace support operations that can be conducted and that are recognized by the UN. And so based on that and a lot of other research and the capability that I knew we had still at that stage in the military, and of course my contention with Brigadier, by then he was a Major General, Dishonour. No, by then he was still a brigadier. He was at the Army Battle School. The whole contention that he and I had about what is a rapid deployment force. So I wrote this essay on a rapid deployment force, meaning an airborne force, a force that can be transported by air and placed where it needs to be, and to use that for peace operations in Africa, and to get it to crisis point in a hurry. And I won the competition with this, and there was a nice formal presentation ceremony at the Army College in what was known in those days as a general's room. I believe it's all been changed now, but it had busts of all the old World War generals in and paintings of them, and it was a very nice formal lounge, the general's room. And in the general's room there was this presentation, and the man who officiated the presentation was the Deputy Minister of Defence, the new Deputy Minister of Defence, Ronnie Kasrils. And he gave a little speech, and he told us how wonderful it is for him to be there. This is a matter of months after he'd been appointed and he explained to us that all these years they'd been planning in such detail how to get into the Army College and cause chaos in the Army College. And now he's actually standing in the Army College and he's able to do this presentation. So anyway, I'll get back to Ronnie Kasrils because I had quite a lengthy relationship with him from time to time. But anyway, this is the speech he gave. And then he presented me with my, I think I got a check as well, but there was this beautiful trophy of a sort of an open book with a crossed writing pen, a quill and a saber crossed like this, and this book down below it, and indicating the pen and the sword, and a very nice trophy. Of course, it was a floating trophy, so I didn't keep it, but I was presented with that. So I was able to do some good research while I was busy at the Army College. I've mentioned the Bisley. I was now again the chief range officer at the Bisley, and again I found I enjoyed it. It was great. It was great to be out for 10 days on the range, and the people enjoyed having me there, and so it became a feature of my life after that. Then I had a very good experience at the Army College. With the BMAT organization, the British Military Assistance or Military Training Team, Assistance and Training Team, whatever it was. The guy who was allocated to the Army College was a British Lieutenant Colonel from the Parachute Regiment, Hamish Fletcher. And because he was from the Parachute Regiment, I used to chat to him quite a bit and so on. And he then, in the middle of his whole tour out there, he suddenly got a message, a signal to say that he's been promoted to a full colonel and been appointed the colonel of the Parachute Regiment, which consists of, I think at that stage they had 3 regular battalions, and I think there were also 3 territorial battalions that were all part of the Parachute Regiment. Now, the colonel of the Parachute Regiment was not an operational appointment. He was responsible for the administration. He had a small headquarters, and he was responsible for administering all the people in the Parachute Regiment and transfers within the Parachute Regiment and little things like that. So, but it was a nice sort of a job, and quite an influential job. And so he was on his way back to the UK, and we were discussing the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Arnhem was coming up, and they wanted to do a jump at the Brits apparently every year they do a jump at Arnhem. I don't know if they still do, but in those days they used to every year they would do a commemorative jump at Arnhem. And that year, I think it was the 3rd battalion of the Parachute Regiment that was responsible to do this. And he said to me one day, he said, would you like to join in, to do the jump at Arnhem? And I said, Hamish, I'd love to do that. So he said, I'll write to the current colonel and see if he'll send you an invitation. And he did. And next minute he came to me and he said, here's your invitation. And so I had the invitation to go, and I took it to Koos Bom, and he referred it to higher headquarters, and Army headquarters, they said, oh, good idea. And so they okayed it. And at military expense, I was able to go over and join with them and do a jump with them. It was at that time, ever since I'd left the Parachute Brigade, I still jumped regularly. I used to go every month. I used to have jumps up near at Swartkop at the Air Force Base, and I would go up and do that. And when there was anything going on in Bloemfontein, I'd go down and I'd jump with them. So I still kept myself current from that point of view. And so Hamish went back, and he said to me, if you come over, you're welcome to stay with me. The OC of 3 Parachute Battalion, Kobus Hoorn, who was a very good friend of mine, who had been a permanent force staff officer of mine until he resigned and then became the citizen force commander of 3 Parachute Battalion. He came across as well, and so we were over there together, and we jumped together, and we did everything together while we were there for about a week, and it was a great opportunity, and when we were busy, but the Brits have a different system to us, because their parachute training is done by the Air Force. Their dispatchers are all Air Force guys, Air Force parachute instructors, and from the moment you fit your parachutes and enter the aircraft, you're no longer subject to anything in the Army. The Air Force decides on everything. So it was and the Brits, one has to remember, they haven't done an operational parachute jump since Suez in 1956. So, it's a long, long time ago since they'd done any operational parachute. We'd been jumping operationally for years in South Africa, from 1974 until until the war ended in 1988, we did many parachute operations, and we'd adjusted our technique because we'd learned from the Brits, and we followed the same system that the Brits did, except that our instructors were all Army personnel; they weren't Air Force personnel. And the parachute training center was at one parachute battalion. It wasn't at a SAF air base, while for the Brits it's at an RAF air base. So they said, well, they're doing a kit jump, so we're going to have to jump with kit. So I said, well, we don't have any kit. They said, it's not a problem. And they got these, what they call Brig-Gens, these rucksacks. And I said, well, I haven't got anything to put in it. They said, no, not a problem. And they filled them with stones. So we had these big Brig-Gens, heavy Brig-Gens full of stones, because they wouldn't allow you to jump clean fatigue in a stick that was jumping with kit. No, we don't have a problem with that. We just put the guys with kit together, and the guys without kit who are clean fatigue we put together. We don't have they have a problem with that. If they've got some guys jumping with kit, everybody jumps with kit. That's just the way it goes. So we got to lug these Brig-Gens into the C-130, and they were the stretched fuselage C-130. And we get into the things, and I've got my camera, you see, because I'm going to take some good pictures now. This is before the days of digital photography, but I had a good camera, and I was going to take. And I often jumped free fall and static line. I would put the camera around my neck and tuck it into my shirt over here, and then as soon as my parachute is opened, then I pull it out, still around my neck, and then I take photographs in the air on my way down. And I'd done that for many years. That has been a problem. And I mean, I'm a qualified parachute instructor. I know how these things work, and I do it properly. I remain within the parameters of it. So we get into the aircraft, and I'm busy taking pictures. And the RAF dispatcher comes down to me, and he says to me, "What are you going to do with that camera?" I said, "No problem. I'll tuck it into my smock over here." He says, "No, you can't jump like that." I said, "I've done it plenty times." He said, "No, dear, you don't do that. He said, "You give it to me. I'll give it to you later when I see you again later." I said, "How do I know I'm going to see you again later? I'll never see my camera again." He said, "Well, the only other way you're going to do it is you're going to have to put it in the Brig-Gen." I said, "It's got stones in it. It's going to damage my camera." So he said, "Well, you're not jumping with it around your neck. There's no way you're doing that." So I said, "Look, I'm a parachute instructor. I've been doing this for years. I know what I'm doing." He said, "I'm the instructor in this aircraft. I'm telling you, you're not jumping with it. If you don't put it in the Brig-Gen, you're not jumping." So I packed it into the Brig-Gen, as best I could. and I thought, well, I looked carefully and made sure that I put it where it's not going to land on the camera. It's going to be near where the rope is holding the thing, because it's going to be hanging 15 foot below me. Anyway, so we jumped on the DZ at Arnhem. The whole battalion was there, and they had a stream of aircraft coming, and one aircraft would drop, but they don't drop in formation, they drop in a stream. So they drop one, and then the next one would come, and the next one would come. And we were in the first aircraft, so we jumped and landed. And I immediately unstrapped the Brig-Gen, and I took out my camera. And I got some good pictures of the other guys coming down and coming past us and so on. But I didn't get any pictures in the air because this knuckle-headed parachute instructor wouldn't let me jump with the camera tucked into my smock. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience to do that, and we were able to spend the day there. It was pouring with rain. We jumped where the John Frost's battalion had jumped at what was it, Gunkelheide, I think it's called. And we landed there, and then we marched from there all the way to the bridge. And there were officers in the battalion. Every so often we'd stop, and they'd all studied the whole way and we took the route that Frost had gone with his battalion. And we'd stop at a spot, and they'd say, and then they drew fire over there, and they went down over here, and so we were able to follow the whole course of the battle for John Frost, and right up to the bridge. Of course, it's a new bridge now that's been built because the old one was destroyed, and all the buildings have been rebuilt. So it looks completely different now. But we were on the actual spot, and it was very good. So that was a little interlude, which I really enjoyed. And then also while I was at the Army College, there was a practical phase to the course, the one here. Brigadier Dippenaar at the Army Battle School had managed to persuade the authorities that the students must come and participate in an exercise called Exercise Sombre at the Army Battle School. He had a divisional-sized exercise. He'd put together a mechanized brigade, and then he had the Parachute Brigade and a divisional headquarters. Of course, he saw the Parachute Brigade as just there to increase the mobility of the mechanized brigade. That wasn't there to do any independent parachute operation. But that's fine. That is one of their jobs. So the students were all dealt into positions in this the two brigade headquarters and the divisional headquarters and so on. And I was appointed as Dippenaar's chief of staff. So I appreciated him doing that, considering that he and I had crossed swords so on occasion about the concept of rapid deployment. But he was a fine officer and a really, I'd worked with him on operations and under him when I was a captain and he was a commandant. And he just, he did things by the book. He did things the way they're supposed to be done. And I was very comfortable with that. So I enjoyed working with him again. A very competent Armored Corps officer who understood how to do things in the field. He was a real field commander. So that was a good experience for me as well. While I was there at the Army College, I applied to become a military attaché, because that was still one of the outstanding goals that I hadn't managed to achieve. I had applied on a number of occasions in the past when it seemed that I wasn't going anywhere. I'd applied. I'd appeared with my wife in front of a selection board, and I normally applied when there was a Spanish-speaking post going, and there was a post going in Chile, which I would really have liked. And I applied for that and never heard from them again. So they obviously didn't. I didn't have a happy relationship with the Defense Forces Directorate of Foreign Relations. Never at any stage did I have a good relationship with them. But anyway, I applied again now, and we appeared before my wife and I appeared before the selection board. There was a brigadier and a whole lot of colonels. And now they asked me questions. And to be quite honest with you, I found them patronizing and arrogant. I really did. I mean, at that stage, I was a senior colonel now. I'd been a colonel for quite a few years. And I'd done a few things that none of them had ever done. And they were so patronizing, the brigadier especially. I really didn't appreciate it at all. So I had my back up a bit when I picked this up. My wife's not like that, She behaves herself and she's quiet and she's laid back and she just accepts things. So now they question us, and this brigadier says to me, "So, which post would you like to apply for? Which would be your preference?" Little knowing that they've already decided. They just want to. I don't actually know what the purpose is of the interview. Just so that you'll think that they've given consideration to some of the things that you say. So I said to him, "Brigadier, I would really like to go to Belgium, because that was one of the posts that was being advertised." So he said, "Why?" So I said, well, sir, my background is conventional. I commanded a conventional parachute brigade, and I've done all the conventional courses, and that's my interest. I speak Spanish, and French is the other NATO language, English and French. I think I could, having mastered Spanish, I think I could probably master French. The two languages are related. I feel that in South Africa at this stage, we are going to have to be thinking in terms of integrating with other countries, operating with other countries in Southern Africa. The whole SADC concept was just sort of being formulated at that stage. And I said that I really feel that we can learn a lot from NATO. They've gone through the problems that we've still going to have to go through. And if I could get access to the NATO headquarters in Brussels, it would give me an opportunity to see what the problems were that they had logistically, particularly logistically, but also in terms of tactics and of training and so on, so that we can avoid those pitfalls and work towards making something like that work for us in Southern Africa. So he says, no, the position in Brussels is actually already filled. It's got a. We've decided that it needs to have an intelligence officer to go there, not an infantry officer. What would your second choice be? So I said, well, sir, because I could only choose from the posts that were available. I said, I would like to go to Argentina in that case. Why? So, well, I think quite obviously because I speak Spanish. So I would be comfortable there. I would be able to fit in quite nicely. He said, no, the Argentina post is reserved for a naval man. Is there another one you might be interested in? So I said, well, sir, what about Ukraine? So he said, no, Ukraine is reserved for a technical officer. Would you be interested in going somewhere in Africa? So I said, sir, if you feel that that's where I should go to, I'll go to a country in Africa. But I would prefer to go to a country that's got an established military capability that I really feel I can learn from and bring stuff back that we can apply in our own country. So he says to me, is there any place that you wouldn't like to go to? So I said, yes, sir, there is. I would not like to go to Taiwan. So he says, and why not? I said, so I think it should be quite apparent. We are going to terminate our diplomatic relations with Taiwan sooner rather than later. And we're going to establish diplomatic relations with mainland China. I wouldn't like to go to a place and midway through my tour, because normally you'll go for 3 or 4 years, you see. Midway through my tour, I have to be recalled because we're ending diplomatic relations. So Brigadier looks at me and says, who told you we're going to be ending diplomatic relations with Taiwan? I said to him, sir, nobody told me that. My common sense tells me that. And doing a basic military appreciation of the situation tells me that there is no way we're going to be able to continue maintaining relations with Taiwan. That's the only objection I've got. He said, you have no business making judgments like that. It's not for you to decide that or the other. This interview is terminated. So I turned around and I walked out with my wife. And I walked out, I said to her, it looks like I've blown that. It doesn't look as if we're going to be going anywhere now. So she says, man, leave it in the hands of the Lord. You don't have to worry about it. He will decide where we have to go to. So I decided, well, you know, if I'm not bound to be a military attaché, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm too blunt. I'm not diplomatic enough. So lo and behold, it wasn't very much longer when the appointments come out. And Colonel Alexander, Taiwan. So I don't know whether it was deliberate to try and show me, you try and be funny with us, then we'll teach you a lesson, or whether they'd all long ago decided this is where we'll send Alexander, we'll keep him out of our hair for a while. But whatever the case, that's what we're going to do. Now, when I got that, I thought back to something that happened to me when I had been in Spain. I was speaking to an American officer that I met in Spain. And he said to me, why have you been sent to Spain? So I said, well, I was sent to Spain because there's virtually nowhere else where we can go for staff training. We don't have access to other countries. So this guy, he was a colonel, and I was a major at that stage. He says, if your military is anything like our military, after having sent you to Spain for 2 years, where you learn how their whole military functions and how you learn to speak their language fluently, and you're in an ideal position to be used as a military attaché in Spain, they'll probably send you to China. So I thought, well, those were prophetic words from that colonel. He didn't know it at the time. Anyway, Anne and I decided that we discussed it, and we said, well, if we're going to go to Taiwan, let's make the best of it. Let's approach the appointment with a positive attitude. Let's hope we can stay there for the whole time. Let's hope that they'll leave us there for 4 years and they won't call us back beforehand, and that the whole diplomatic crisis will pass after we come back. Let's hope so. But even if it doesn't, let's go and let's throw ourselves into it with everything, and let's do the best we can. And that's what we did. That was our approach to the whole thing. We decided we would see it as an opportunity rather than a disappointment, because I wasn't disappointed to be sent to the East. That didn't bother me. I've known some guys who say, I will only be a military attaché if I can go to the United States or to the UK. Why? Well, to start with, they don't have to learn a new language. Secondly, the culture's not all that different. The foodstuffs they eat are going to be normal foodstuffs that we know. There's very little extra inconvenience that they're faced with. So that's what they would like. And some guys get away with it. They manage to be sent where they want to go. They're not going unless they be sent there. So they get sent there. That's never been my approach. I've always said, well, if that's where I'm needed, that's where I go. They could have sent me to any country in Africa, which would have been something of a disappointment, because there are no African countries that had a really advanced military that I would have felt I could learn something from. We probably had the most advanced military in Africa at that stage. So, but I would have accepted it, because that's what a soldier's supposed to do. So we decided we're going to see this as an opportunity rather than as a disappointment. And we accepted it. This is the Lord's will on our lives, and that he's got a purpose in sending us there. I think that purpose became very apparent at a later stage, but at that stage we didn't know. But we said, well, this is where God wants us, so this is where we'll go. So all in good time, we had to go and attend an attaché course. I had to attend the whole course, and I think for the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the wives had to be there as well. We went to the Military Intelligence College, and that's where it was presented. You do need to do some sort of specialized study before you become a military attaché. A military attaché is essentially an official legal gatherer of intelligence. That's what he's doing. He gets anything that he feels could be of benefit in that part of the world that he can send back. And the host country knows that he's there and knows that he's doing that. So they don't have a problem with that. They accept that. They will control his access to what they want to, and that's just the way it works. And he's also seen as a liaison officer. Anything to do with that country and your own country, he's the person that is sort of is the go-between that will liaise with the necessary people to sort it out. So he's involved in any sales of arms. He's involved in any visits by dignitaries from the one country to the other country. He's involved in any presentations that have got to be made, any awards that have got to be made, any assistance by the one or the other, any exchanges of people from the different countries. So these are the things that he's faced with. They had an exam that we had to write during this course. It was a Department of Foreign Affairs exam. Department of Foreign Affairs insists that everybody, or in those days they did, I don't think they do anymore, not after some of the diplomats I've seen, but in those days diplomats had to pass this diplomatic exam beforehand. Now my wife was not impressed because we were told your wives all have to write the exam as well, and they all have to pass. My wife, the last time she wrote any exam was when she did her matric. She never wrote another exam after that, and she had no intention of ever writing another exam. Now she arrives here, and they tell her she's got to write an exam. She was not happy about that at all. So, you got your book, and you got to study your book and so on, and it's all the protocols and various other things and so on. Man, I was worried about Anne because she just sort of laughed us off. She said, she's not going to do this. She's not. I said, you got to do this. Anyway, she passed her exam. Skin of the teeth, but she passed the exam. So we got through that. I was far more relieved than she was. She wasn't fussed about the exam. There were sections of the course which go about how you dress for certain occasions and how long your tie must be and matching colors. Now, I'm basically colorblind, so that's a bit of a problem for me. But I told Anne to listen carefully so that she could help me if I got something wrong. Setting tables and entertainment and so some of them were stuff that anybody should know, but some of it was stuff that I certainly didn't know. So it was an interesting course. We had a visit to down to the Western Cape, where we visited the Langebaanweg flying school and the Simonstown and the military academy and all of those sort of places. And then when we came back, we had to write a visit report. And this, they told us, would be, they will mark it and tell us how their visit report, then so that you know how to, when you go on a visit anywhere as a military attaché in your host country, you must send back a report. And this is, so, I'd been a chief instructor at the staff duties branch of the Army College for several years at that stage. And so I'd been marking other people's reports and things like that. So I wrote this report. And the reports came back, and I looked through mine. So I went to the guy who was the instructor, and he was only a lieutenant colonel. And I said to him, listen, you haven't put anything, you haven't written any comments here, you haven't told me what I've done wrong. He said, no, I haven't seen a report like that before. I've never seen a report where that's exactly how it must be. That's how you must do it. So I said, well, thank you very much. So I appreciated that. Then we had a little incident at the college, which embarrassed me terribly, but which I tried to correct as best I could. Each of the arms of service, the Army, Air Force, and Navy, had to come and address us on the strategy of their service. They were going ahead, how they're going to do it. And the Air Force came along, and they had a colonel who addressed us, and he gave a very good briefing and told us exactly where, given the uncertainty of the time and how they were approaching it and how they were going to do it. And it was a very good presentation. Naval guy came and got along, outstanding, very good, very realistic, showing what the problems are, the uncertainties, how they're going to approach it, and the strategies of these various, because we have to now know when we're deployed, how are we going to handle these things. Army guys comes along, the presentation is going to come. We're all sitting in the classroom there, in the kupol, as they call it, the little dome at the which has got this lecture room, circular lecture room at the Military Intelligence College, and we're waiting, and we wait. The guy doesn't come, doesn't pitch up. So, you know, as the senior colonel amongst the guys in the army, I go and phone the army headquarters, and I say, well, you know, this guy's supposed to talk. Where is he? Eventually, they put me through to his office. No, says the secretary there. No, he's had to go to something out in north of Pretoria or something. I said, but he's supposed to be giving us a lecture on the army strategy at the moment. And he's not here, and we're all waiting. No, I'm very sorry, but I'll tell him about it. You'll have to see if you can reschedule it. So I went to the course leader and said to him, look, the guy's not coming. You guys will have to try and sort out something else. I'm embarrassed as an army student among, because we had Air Force and Navy guys who were, you know, also going to be attaches in different places and so on. Anyway, they reschedule it, and the guy has to come again. So we had, as students, and I'd been appointed as a sort of the student leader amongst this group of attaches, prospective attaches. And we would appoint one of the guys to do a thank you at the end of it. When a guy has come and he's discussed, given his presentation, we will come and somebody will stand up and say, thank you very much, and, you know, point out what some of the good points we've picked up from it and so on. So I said to the guys, I'm going to thank him. I'm going to thank him. So don't worry about that. So this guy comes in. I knew him. I knew who he was. He walks in, very blasé, doesn't say a word about not having pitched up the previous time. And he goes on and gives his presentation. It wasn't a very good presentation at all. It was quite clear to me that the army didn't really know if this was their strategy. They didn't really know what they were going to do. They didn't know how they were going to handle the next few years. And then he finishes it and he closes everything up and says, thank you very much. So I stood up and I said to him, I won't mention his name, but I said to him, listen, it falls to me to thank you for this presentation that you have given. And he sort of stands there, you know, expecting flowery words to come from me and so on. So I said to him, but I'm not thanking you for anything, because you didn't even pitch up on the day you were supposed to come. You never sent an apology. You never sent any reason. And you walk in here today and you don't even mention it. You carry on as though there's nothing has happened. You're an embarrassment to the army. You shouldn't be representing the army anywhere. I'm not thanking you for anything. Your presentation was pathetic anyway. Now, if ever you have to do this again, let me tell you, as one colonel to another, you'd better get your act together and do it properly. You can go. Yeah. That guy was livid. So, you know, we break, and one of the other wives comes to me afterwards. She says to me, ek het nog nooit so iets in my lewe gehoor. My tone het gekrul van die lekkerheid toe jy met hom so praat. So we all go down the steps to go out, and when I get to the bottom, he's waiting at the door. And he says to me, Mac, you have no right to speak to me like that in front of all those people. I said to him, listen, don't you talk to me about who's got rights to do anything. You have no right to make an appointment and then you don't keep it, and you don't even make an excuse. You don't even send an apology. So don't talk to me about who's got a right to do anything or not. I'm perfectly in my rights telling you where to get off. I never ever spoke to him again. He never spoke to me again. And I'm not surprised, but he was eventually fired for fraud out of the army. So in those days, he used to still fire people for fraud. But, you know, anyway. So the end of the course comes, and we have to have a sort of a function, and we have a function, and an officiating guest comes along to sort of give the speech and so on. No other than the Deputy Ministry of Defence, Ronnie Cassells. So it was very funny to me, because he gave exactly the same speech that he'd given at the Army College, and told them about how they'd planned to get into the Defence College and they weren't able to figure it. And now he's standing here and he's giving a speech in the Defence College. At least you could have thought up a new speech for us. Anyhow, but I must also say, and I'm going to get to that when I speak about Taiwan, I actually, to my own surprise, got on extremely well with Ronnie Cassells, in spite of the fact that we had fundamental differences, and we disagreed on very, very fundamental issues, particularly on communism. Anyway, we then had to do some preparation for our departure. It was still almost a year away before we were due to go, but we had to start getting things sorted out. So first of all, I enrolled for Mandarin classes. And I think I went 2 or 3 times a week to a Taiwanese woman, Lucia Hao Yuan. And she had me and I think 3 other members of the Department of Foreign Affairs that she was giving classes to in Mandarin. I battled. I really, really battled. I found Mandarin a totally different challenge to Spanish. I mean, I don't have a natural affinity for languages. I had to work very hard to come reasonably near to mastering Spanish, so that I could give talks and speeches and write things and so on in Spanish. It was hard work to reach that level. But in Chinese, wow, because it's a tonal language, and you've got to adjust your tones to a different tone means a different thing for the same word. So, you don't know whether if your tone is wrong, you might be wanting to talk about horse, but you might be saying mother-in-law, just because your tone is wrong. So, there are all sorts of issues that can confuse that. And I really battled. And of course, it doesn't have an alphabet. It has characters, and you've got to memorize these characters. And we're talking about 3,000 to 6,000 characters that you have to memorize. So I don't make any secret of the fact that I never ever mastered Spanish. I tried very hard, but I'm not Spanish, Mandarin. But it was a huge challenge to me. Anne, of course, was working at that stage. She'd have to take leave to attend this little attaché course. But now she had to also resign and give plenty of warning to her company that she would not be working anymore. One of the things that we just never understood about them, you would think that they would figure these sort of things out. We were given an allowance which we had to spend on stuff that we would need for entertaining. And they gave us a list of the things that we needed. So everything that we didn't have on that list, we had to go and buy. And it entailed cutlery and crockery and glasses and cake stands and all sorts of things, so that you can entertain properly in your home. And it was a heck of a lot of money that we had to spend. It wasn't our money. It was an allowance we were given to purchase all these things so we could take them over there and use them. When we got to Taiwan, the military attaché there said to me, I don't know why they do this. He said, in Chinese culture, you don't entertain in your home. You don't do that. You entertain in a restaurant. You contact a restaurant. Every restaurant has a private room for entertainment, and you book that private room, and you get to meet the people there, and you have, because he said the Chinese people have very tiny little houses. They can't reciprocate in their own house, and it's an embarrassment for them to if you invite them to your home, they feel they have to invite you to their home, and their home is not up to the standard of the diplomatic home that you're staying in, that's being paid for by the state, and so on. So you must entertain in a restaurant. That's how it works, or in a hotel, not at home. And the Chinese will do the same. They will invite you to restaurants or hotels. That's the way entertainment is done over here. So I said to him, but didn't you tell the guys there at DFA that they got to do that? He said, not only did I tell them, every one of my predecessors has told them that. Yet every one that they send to Taiwan, they give them this allowance and they have to buy all of these things that they're never going to use for what it's been bought for. So, it's just the military attaché must get an allowance to buy the stuff. And they don't think of it. I mean, somebody's not doing their work. Somebody needs to be kicked on the butt or fired, but nobody's doing it. So even back in the so-called good old days, the people weren't as efficient as they sometimes make out they were. So we had to get those things. We didn't know that at the time, so we had to go around and go to shops and get the best things that we felt that we were going to need. And I have to entertain with booze. Now part of the thing that they show you there is what glasses you must use for what kind of drink, and you've got to have all of those glasses in your house and so on. In the end, the only people who used those glasses were South African visitors who came over, and I could comfortably invite them to my house, and then they would want brandy or whiskey or whatever the case was. My second daughter, Shona, she was finishing matric that year. So, she had to decide, is she going to come with us? Or is she going to stay here? What's she going to do? And so she opted to go to the Pretoria Technikon and to study something there, which didn't turn out a success, but that's what she said she would do at that stage. And so she had to be enrolled, and we had to get that sorted out and make sure that while we're now over in Taiwan, she's being, she's okay over there, book her into the residence and all the rest of it. And then, of course, we had to make decisions about what is going to accompany us and what is going to go into storage. And that was, generally that's not such a big issue, but for me it was a big issue because, at that stage I had a library of about 6,000 books. I don't know how big my library is now. It's probably a lot more than that. But at that stage I had about 6,000 books. And I said to myself, I'm not leaving my books behind. Yeah, I refer to those things all the time. I use them as reference works. I'm constantly checking things in them and going back. I said, no, my books are going to come with us. They're going to go into the container and go with us. So as my wife loves to tell the story of how I was, right up until the container arrived at our house, I was worrying all the time that the ship with the containers in would get into rough seas and start swaying around, and our container with all my books in would go overboard and I'd lose all my books. So fortunately that didn't happen, and I got all my books into to Taiwan. So, and then before we left to go to Taiwan, I had to go on the Joint Staff course. Now, I'd been agitating to go on the Joint Staff course for quite a while because I was starting to become quite a senior colonel now. And, a lot of guys who were junior to me had already gone on the Joint Staff course. And the Joint Staff course is really the last course that you do in the military. It's supposed to be on the highest level. It's supposed to address the strategic level of command. I was at the Army College, I was working on the operational level. But this is supposed to go on to the strategic level. Now, this is the highest level, and this prepares you for appointment as a general and or an admiral. And you've got to now understand how things work at Defense Headquarters, at the Ministry of Defense, at government level. All those sort of things have now got to be, you've got to master that sort of thing. So I wanted to get this behind me. I wasn't wildly excited about doing the course. It didn't really fall into part of the goals I'd set myself for the military. But clearly, I wasn't going to. If I didn't get this course behind me, I still had a good, at that stage, 10 years to go more than 10 years before I was due for retirement. So, I still wanted to get some decent jobs, and this would just give me a better chance of getting such jobs. So I wanted it to be done and over with. I think the course was about 4 or 5 months in duration. It was at the Defence College in Pretoria. The participants were generally colonels, senior colonels. There were some who were brigadiers who'd actually, for one reason or another, missed the opportunity to do it while they were colonels, but they'd been promoted. They were obviously some of the chosen, the anointed amongst us. So they were going places. So they were promoted without having done a joint staff course. But in time, they would have to do it. So then they come along as a brigadier and do the course. And we even had a major general with us, but he was an ex-MK guy and he was a medic. He was actually a really nice guy. He became the Surgeon General, but then he died of cancer. But he was a really nice guy. He actually donated his MK uniform to me when he heard that I was collecting camouflage uniforms and so on. He donated that his one to me, which I was very grateful to him for. But he was Masuku, was his name, General Masuku. And his wife was also Annie, and his wife and my wife got on quite well. So he was a knowledgeable guy and a good sort of person, and we got on well together. A lot of the other guys I knew, most of them, in fact. We had Army, Air Force, and Navy guys together, and medical service. And some of them I'd known for a long, long time. Some of them, I suppose we have different opinions about different people, and some of them, I suppose, I didn't have a great opinion of, but some of them were really outstanding officers and really, really good. And quite a few of them went on to 2-star rank. They were really, really exceptional guys. The so-called Regal was the name they gave to, at each of the staff colleges. The students would elect a leader amongst them who would be their spokesman and who would be the go-between between them and the instructors and so on. And for whatever reason, this was always referred to as the Beagle at the Army College. And at the Naval College, I think he was called the Seagull. I can't remember what he was called at the Air Force College. But the guy at the Defence College for the Joint Staff course, he was called the Regal. So our Regal was a man by the name of Andre Bespier, who was already a brigadier. He'd been military attaché in Taiwan. He'd been with Special Forces after he left the Parachute Battalion. And then from there, he became military attaché, not in Taiwan, in Portugal. And I think that's why he'd never gone on the Joint Staff course, because when he came back from Portugal, he was such a senior colonel that they promoted him to brigadier. And he was given Free State Command. And then he was sent on the Joint Staff course. So he was on the course with me. And he was our Regal. A very powerful personality. He's dead now. He died just a few months back. But I knew him well. I'd served under him when he was a company commander, as his second in command for about 3 months before I went to the military academy. And of course, then I knew him here and there when I'd come across him when he was with Special Forces. But he was the person that we all sort of, if we wanted anything done with instructors, we would work through the Regal. And he was, as I say, a very, very powerful personality, a very strong person. You didn't easily cross him, and he didn't brook nonsense from anybody. I tried to cross him once or twice subsequently, and I came second every time. So you know, that's just the way that he was. But he was a very good, very competent man, a very good officer. Because of the uncertainty about our future, and because nobody really knew what was, because now this was in 1995. This is a year after the integration had commenced. The SADF guys were mainly still in command, in control. They were still managing everything, but everybody knew it was going to start changing around completely, and nobody knew where that would go to. And I was a bit disappointed in the content of the course, because the course didn't seem to really address this change that was coming. I suppose they didn't really know what was going to happen. That was part of it. But, you know, I just felt that in some ways they were sort of so far behind that it was worrying me. I'll give you an example. We had down on our program to discuss the Indian population of South Africa. You know, we were looking at various aspects, demographics and so on of the country, and we were going to get a lecture now on the Indian population of South Africa, where they come from, what they consist of, who they are, where they fit into the picture, and so on, their aspirations and their situation and so on. Who comes and gives us a lecture? An ethnologist, white, Afrikaans speaking. I went to one of the instructors afterwards. I said, listen, this is the new South Africa. Why don't we get an Indian to come and tell us about the Indians? Why have we got to get a white Afrikaner to come and do it? You know, that's apartheid days, that. We need one of the Indians to come and tell us about the Indians. Let them tell us about their aspirations. Let them tell us about their frustrations and about the difficulties. It's not difficult now. This is a new South Africa. For some reason, this guy had been doing it for years, so he came along and did it again. Anyway, you know, the little things like that, they're not huge issues, but they're little things, and I was a bit disappointed. I just felt that it could have been handled a little differently. The other students were very keen on volleyball, and apparently volleyball was a big thing on every joint staff course. But I've never been a guy for any kind of ball. I just don't go for that sort of thing. So I attended all the volleyball matches and so on, but I didn't play. I took photographs, and that was a good way of getting out of it. You know, I walked around taking pictures of the guys beating balls around, but that wasn't my thing at all. So every opportunity they got, and everywhere we went, they had to play volleyball against someone, volleyball against this college, volleyball against that college, volleyball against the Navy here, volleyball against the Air Force there. And anyway, I suppose it was a good way of an outlet, but it wasn't my style. We were given syndicate strategy tasks. We were divided into syndicates of about 4 or 5 people or so in each syndicate. And then you would be given a subject, and you've got to discuss it from a strategic point of view. And the syndicate that I was in was given the American Civil War, and we had to speak about the strategy that was followed in the American Civil War. That was amazing. It was absolutely fascinating. I really, really enjoyed that. Unfortunately, the guy who was our syndicate leader was totally useless. He didn't have a clue. He didn't have a clue what to do. I don't think he'd ever heard about the American Civil War. He didn't really know what it was about. But so I tended to take the initiative with this because I was very excited about it. I thought this sounds like a great subject that we can work on. And I went to the U.S. Embassy, and I made an appointment with the military attaché. And I said to him, look, this is the task we've been given. Can you help us with stuff? He said, can I help you? He said, give me a little while. How much time have you got before you've got to hand it in? I said, no, we've got to present it at the end of the course. We've got a few weeks to work on it and so on. So he said, I'll get you some stuff by next week. Yeah, he got me masses of stuff. And when we did our presentation, we started it off with playing the Battle Hymn of the Republic as a sort of background music, and it was before we had Lipro for presentations and so on. So we still had to do transparencies on overhead projectors and so on. And I've still got all my transparencies in a file here that we used for that thing. And it was a great, to me, it was fascinating to sit down and study the strategy and the role that the railways played in it, and how that affected the whole strategy of the war. It was really great. I'm really pleased that I happened to get into a syndicate that as a subject. And then each of us was given an individual, or we were told to select a topic to write on as a strategic research project. There was a trophy, a huge big cup donated by Sanlam, and it was a Sanlam research trophy. And for this, you had to produce something which could be the results of your research could be of lasting value to the Defence Force. So I tackled that one with gusto. I really enjoyed it. I didn't really enjoy the classroom side of the course at all. The day we arrived at the course, the first thing they said to us is, you people are not students, you're course attendees, kursusgangers. Julle is nie studente nie, julle is kursusgangers. You're attending a course. You're not students, which I didn't like it at all, because I'm a student till the day I die. I'm learning all the time. That's what a student does. He learns. But they said, no, you're a course attendant. And they also said to us, you don't have to worry about whether you're going to pass or not. You've already all passed. All of you. We're telling you now on the first day of the course, you've all passed the course. There's no exam. You're not going to have to. Well, fine. If that's the way they want it, that's okay. I'm not great on exams myself, so I didn't mind that. But anyway, that's the way they did it. But this, I was excited about the syndicate task that we had to prepare, and I was excited about the research project. And I spent many hours in their library. They had a very good library at the Defence College. I spent many hours in that library. And in other libraries, and amongst my own books, and what I selected as my topic for this project was the employment of an SANDF Parachute Brigade in interventionist peace support operations in Africa. That was my topic. Interventionist peace, because that's the highest level of peace support operations that you can, interventionist, and the one they're most reluctant to employ, but the one which is often very, very important when you get to that category where you're actually going to intervene. And the UN is able to do it. Constitutionally, the UN can order an intervention by a peace support operation or force, and this is what I wrote about. And I went into considerable detail. It's quite a thick document that I put out, and I won the prize. I won the trophy for the best strategic research paper on the course. And the commandant of the Defence College at that stage was Commodore Eric Green, who had been the CATF when I was the CAF during the amphibious operation exercises that we'd done. So I knew Eric Green very well, and he and I got on very well together. Now he didn't award the prize. The staff of the DS on the course, they all read the papers, and they decided between them which is going to be the best, and then they submitted that to Eric Green. And when I at the end of the course, when I went up to Eric Green's office to say goodbye to him, he said to me, Mac, that paper that you wrote, I'm going to take that to the Chief of the Army, and I'm going to give it to him personally, because that paper, they need to pay attention to that. That paper can make a difference. So I said, thank you, sir, I appreciate that. Knowing Eric Green, I have no doubt at all that he did that. But knowing the guy who was Chief of the Army at that stage, I am pretty sure that he took it and dropped it in the waste paper basket. So, because I never heard anything more about it. But I know the man who was Chief of the Army at that stage was not in the least bit friendly disposed towards me, and had crossed me on the whole issue of the move of the brigade to Bloemfontein. Anyway, that was that. And then I came to the end of my time at the Army College, and it was time to go to Taiwan. And of course, if it's okay with you, I think maybe I should end this talk here. And next time we can talk about Taiwan and what happened in Taiwan, because that's really a different issue altogether. Are you okay with that? Okay.
Yes, I'm good with that. Thank you, sir. I have, of course, a whole bunch of questions, and I just want to thank you again, sir. It's Good Friday today. I know you're a religious man. So I want to thank you for talking to us today. But talking about peace, sir, I recall that 1994, I was actually called up back to the police, would you believe? I arrived there after 2 years at university. I was not in a police mode anymore, but I got called up for 2 months. And we did all sorts of things, and I do recall the National Peacekeeping Force. They didn't do well. I think there was a photographer or somebody got killed whilst with them. It was just chaos. And then there was General Viljoen, Constant Viljoen. And I think the country was on a knife edge. If General Viljoen decided to make a move, I believe there would have been a civil war.
Yeah.
So I wonder how, sir, you people who were still in the army at that stage, were you aware of these currents running in the background?
Of course we were. At the Army College, the DS that I had, the guys who'd been selected to be DS, they were usually very, very carefully selected. And they're guys who've done well on their staff course. And they've got to be guys with a good intellect. And I was privileged to have the DS that I had. It was a privilege to work with those men. I say that the lieutenant colonels is a difficult rank group to work with, but that doesn't alter the fact that these guys were the DS who worked directly under me were exceptional men, exceptional officers. And they were all very aware of the situation. And they knew what a knife edge we were walking. But they also were very, very, they were astute, they were realistic, they knew the dangers. And I never at any stage got the impression amongst them that they were ready to go into open revolt. They were not that sort of person, not at all. I can't say the same for the students. I think there were some of the students who would readily have, if there had been a move to resort to conflict, I think there would have been quite a few of them who would have followed suit. But I also think that within the military, there was a very strong sense. It had been imbued in all of us from when you were a young lieutenant, that you don't contradict the way that the military is moving. This is, and if the military is moving in this particular way, then that's the way that you go. And I think, Constant Viljoen's wise decision, I believe it was a wise decision in the end, not to resort to force. Together with George Meyring's strong leadership at the head of the Defence Force, I think they both contributed in a very serious way. If there'd been, for argument's sake, somebody in charge of the army, who was very right-wing oriented and a very strong person, and who'd tried to counter what George Meyrink was doing, that could have led to bloodshed. It could have led to all sorts of problems. But in fact, George Meyrink had a very strong control of the Defence Force. He had a strong hand, and he was not afraid to show that. And I think between the two of them, those two generals, Viljoen and Meyrink, played a major role in a peaceful transition that could have very easily turned violent, very easily. And I think history will show us that ultimately. But because we're still so close to it at this stage, I don't think people give them enough credit for what they did to help us through. Just as people don't give the Defence Force and the police enough credit for the role they played in keeping the violence down over that period.
You're quite right, sir, because I remember being briefed by very senior police generals, and they were basically trying to find out where we stand.
Yeah.
And then they also one mentioned that we might have to disarm army units. And I thought to myself, this was in Bloemfontein, I thought to myself, there's no way we can disarm the army units. If they don't want to be disarmed, we're going to die there.
Yeah.
And thank God he didn't come to that. But on a lighter note, sir, you told us in Spain that all the instructors would walk in and then one would give a class and all of them would sit and watch. Is that the same system in South Africa?
No, not at all. To start with, we were far less formal in opening every day, in starting our classes and so on. Generally, the instructor that was giving the lesson would be the only instructor there, the one who was speaking. He would be the only one there. There was nothing to stop me from going and sitting in and to listen to what he was saying, which I did occasionally. But I mean, I had full confidence in them. I knew that they knew what they were talking about. And so, you know, it was in the same way the commander of the Army College, the commandant as he's called now, he was called the officer commanding back then. He was free to go and sit in on any presentation, any lecture, anything. He could go and sit there and listen. But it would be the exception. It would occasionally he would do that. The same with me. I would occasionally do that. But I would rather my DS all be preparing for their own lectures and being used constructively than sitting there listening to a lecture that they've heard a dozen times before and trying to keep their eyes open. There's nothing productive about that. So I didn't like the system that the Spaniards used. And we certainly didn't have that situation at all. We didn't have that system.
I want to talk about Arnhem, sir.
Yes.
When you were jumping at Arnhem, you said to me that it was not information. In other words, the aircraft were following each other. Now I need to know, does that not affect the paratrooper with more slipstream and wind because of the aircraft who were in the front? Or is there sufficient space between them?
Yeah, it's actually not a problem at all, because when they drop in a stream, I'd never encountered that system of parachute dropping before. But when they drop in a stream, there's the next aircraft that comes is by the time it comes to the area where they're over the DZ, the guys who dropped from the first aircraft are already on the ground. That's how far back he is. So there's no chance of that happening. Now, you know, I would still have to sit down and talk to probably the RAF, because no doubt they decide on this, why they do it that way. I do understand that if you drop in formation, say in a V formation, which is what we tended to do, then your aircraft are all bunched together. So they are vulnerable. I understand that. But if you are going to have a stream with each aircraft flying exactly the same route, then surely after the first aircraft has come in, the others are sitting ducks. They're going to be taken out. So I don't fully understand that system, but the Brits are quite adamant about that they will drop in a stream. And, after we dropped or jumped from the first aircraft, after we landed, we looked up, we saw the other aircraft coming over and the parachutes blossoming above us. Far behind, we saw the third one, and then the fourth one. They dropped a whole battalion, a complete battalion on that occasion. It just didn't seem to quite make sense to me. Maybe it works a bit differently at night. Maybe it's more useful or sensible at night. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. The people that I found from what I've looked at with these things, the guys who understood the dropping of paratroops the best were the Rhodesians. To start with, they dropped very low. But secondly, when they dropped, if they dropped a stop line with 2 or 3 aircraft, those aircraft would follow behind one another. But they would fly at different heights. Now we followed that as well. So the one would drop at 600 feet. The one right behind it would drop at 700, and the one right behind it would drop at 800. So that there's no chance of the aircraft going into the parachutes of the other one. There's no chance of anything going wrong there. And the guys all land on the DZ exactly where they're supposed to. I mean, the Rhodesians were phenomenal in the way they could position their paratroopers exactly where they wanted them. But then one has to understand that they were using Dakotas. And it's a lot easier to do that with a Dakota than it is with a C-130. C-130 is a different animal to control. So I don't know. It's a complex thing, but I would like to discuss the Brit system of a stream in more detail with them, because I don't fully understand it.
So will it make a difference if you start playing around with a static line in length? If you make it shorter on the first stick and longer for the ones after, or vice versa? Would that make a difference in how a parachute deploy and how quickly they get to the ground?
Yeah, I suppose in theory it might. The problem is that you look for an optimal size length of the parachute static line based on partly on the aircraft and partly on the parachute itself. Now, when I say the aircraft, if you're dealing with a Dakota or that type of aircraft where the tailplane is fairly close to the door, you don't want to have anything tangling or hitting the tailplane. If your parachute opens too soon, it can hit the tailplane and either get entangled in the tailplane or get severely burnt in the tailplane or perhaps damage the tailplane. So you don't want that to happen. So you want that to happen below the tailplane. Once you're out and the bag is being dragged, you don't want that bag getting tangled in the tailplane. So you have to be careful of that as well, because all those bags have to be pulled back in. On a C-130, you've got a winch that assists you to pull them in. But on an aircraft like the Dakota, you have to do it by hand. So if you're dropping a stick of 20, pulling those parachute bags back in, that's a hard job. It's really a hard job doing it. So I suppose in theory that could make a difference, but it would make things far more complex, because you would have to make sure you got the right parachute and the right aircraft. You know, there are a lot of little things like that go wrong. We found that some parachutes didn't work well with the Dakota because of the position of the tailplane. The ones we used, the T10 type of parachute and the Saviak, which was modeled on it, they worked perfectly. The distances were fine. It was you could have people jumping out without any problem. But it was for exactly that reason that before we jumped from the Junkers, we had to do some tests first of all, and we had to make sure that pilot was prepared to let us do those tests, so that it wouldn't, because that door is very close to the tailplane.
But I want to ask you, sir, this plan of yours for which you won the prize, the intervention with a parachute, would that have worked in Rwanda?
I think so. The problem is always the political decision to go ahead. And you know, with any airborne operation, particularly if it's an interventionist operation, timing is everything. You've got to carry out that operation at the right time. And if you have vacillation on the part of the politicians, the right time might come and go. And then you carry it out and then you say, no, but you see, we should never have done an airborne operation because, but the timing was wrong. If the timing is wrong, and then everything can go wrong. So I think in Rwanda it would have worked. I actually wrote as an appendix to this, to the paper I wrote. I wrote an imaginary scenario of a country in Africa. No, I didn't name any specific country, but a country in Africa where this operation has to be carried out. And I tried to build in all the things that could possibly go wrong and all the things that could go right. And I described this operation as if it had actually taken place, which is a little lesson that I'd learned when I went to the British Staff College at Camberley to attend an airborne symposium. And I listened to the a brigade commander of their airborne brigade at that time, 16 Air Assault Brigade, I think they called themselves, explaining an operation. I sat there listening to what he described, and he had slides showing and so on. And I thought to myself, I've never heard of this operation. When did it take place? It was done so professionally and so well. And when he'd finished, then he explained to them that this is an imaginary scenario. I'm just showing you what could have happened. So I built something like that into this paper that I did. And much of that little scenario that I wrote could actually have been applied to Burundi. Very much so.
Renzo, I have to ask you if there's any way which we are watching here can support the Bisley or the World Championships next year. Can you go and watch it or look at it or something?
Yeah, the championships taking place next year are the F-class championships. That's the free rifle, and in other words, those are rifles that are used with a dead rest and a telescope. The following year, the target rifle World Championship will be held, and there's no dead rest. You just have a rifle sling around your arm, and you have a peep sight, a Chaiki Fasir. There's no telescope involved. So they're the same distances, the same competitions, but different style, different type of a different class of rifle is used. I think the guys would appreciate any attendance in terms of spectators, but I have to admit that Bisley is not a spectator sport. For those who love rifle shooting, it's wonderful, but it's not the sort of sport that you can get excited about like with soccer or rugby when you're watching a cup final or something. It's not like that at all, but you can get very excited if you know something about shooting and you see the standard of marksmanship that these people display when they are shooting. And obviously, it would be wonderful if as many people as possible could come to the championships and watch them. They'll be held over a period of about a week. So, one doesn't have to be there every day, but the nearer you come to the last day, because the last day is when the most important shooting takes place. I don't have the dates with me offhand, but I can get them from the internet. They're all on the South African Bisley Union website, where one can see these things. It's all listed there. And as I say, for a person who's interested in shooting, it's an incredible experience to watch these guys And one needs to take a pair of binoculars or a telescope with you so that you can look at the targets when the guys are shooting and get an indication of how well they're doing. And then that does become, for me as a person who's been watching it for years, it is exciting. And certainly if someone who is interested would want to come, there's no doubt the Bisley shotters would certainly appreciate that. It'll be on the range at the Brug in Bloemfontein. That's the plan. About 24 k's outside of Bloemfontein.
Well, Internet, we've come to the end of this one. It might have been the shortest one we've ever done with General McGill. We're just laughing here, but we don't mind. We don't mind. Let's thank you once again. We are really grateful for your time, especially on a day like today. And there's going to be another 2 or 3, perhaps more. We don't care. And we're looking forward. Everybody, if you're listening here, you have a story, you know by now, just come and talk to me or grab me in South Africa when I'm there in May. I'll gladly talk to you. I'll gladly see if we can record your story. So, sir, thank you very much once again. And until we meet again, God bless.
Thank you, Chris.